Welcome to Blaze News, The Mandate, Day 14. I'm Jill Savage. Tonight on the agenda, President Trump took another step to slash DEI from the U.S. military, announcing on Truth Social his plan to dismiss the Board of Visitors over concerns that they have infiltrated service academies with woke ideologies. Acting FEMA Director Cameron Hamilton said that all payments to illegal immigrants have been halted after DOGE discovered $59 million went to housing for individuals who came into the country illegally. A third federal judge has blocked President Trump's executive order that would ban birthright citizenship. This executive order has already sparked 9 lawsuits less than a month after Trump signed it. You can go back and watch our interview with former Trump lawyer John Eastman last week in case you missed it. He's one of the leading experts on birthright citizenship in this country. And President Trump and Vice President JD Vance may be gearing up for a legal battle over the separation of powers. A U.S. district judge temporarily blocked Elon Musk and DOGE from gaining access to the payment system of the Treasury Department to conduct an audit. Jack Posobiec is a senior editor of Human Events. He shared this take on X, writing that I see all the people who called for the Supreme Court to be overthrown last year are now screaming, how dare JD Vance question a court order? To prove his point, here's a crowd of people cheering for Biden's decision to ignore the Supreme Court rulings.
Supreme Court blocked me from relieving student debt, but they didn't stop me. So far, I relieved student debt for nearly 5 million Americans. A significant number are black borrowers.
Thankfully, we don't have to see those clips very often anymore. But tonight's stories paint a clear picture of the fight that's defining this moment in American history. President Trump isn't just battling the political opposition. He's taking on an entrenched bureaucratic machine that has spent decades cementing his power. Trump is waging a war against a system that resists accountability at every turn. The deep state, the courts, the entrenched bureaucrats, they aren't just pushing back. They're actively working to undermine his agenda. And we've seen this with the repeated attempts to block his policies. Now, this fight isn't just about Donald Trump. It's about whether the American people still have control over their government or whether unelected elites will continue to dictate to the nation's future. And as we've seen time and time again, President Trump isn't afraid to take this fight head on. Now, let's welcome Blaze News Editor-in-Chief Matthew Peterson. Let's look at the separation of powers first, shall we? I look at Trump and Vance. What do you see coming in their future in terms of this legal battle?
Well, I mean, first off, in general, in American politics, when one side is, depending on where you have your power base, right? When one side owns the courts, the other side owns the presidency, you become a big fan of whatever branch, right, is for your side. So let's stipulate that for the record, objectively. So in other words, you have a Democratic president. The Democrats are like all about executive power. He was elected by the people. The courts stop it and the courts are evil. All of a sudden, the courts become good when they're on your side. That's just how American politics works. But what is also true is that for many, many years now, federal judges have been way more activists on the left. It only ratchets it in one direction, and they consistently thwart any executive action on the part of a Republican president. We can't go into all the details here tonight on this show, but the details of this are just horrendous. I mean, you have a judge effectively saying, and multiple judges saying, no, you can't have a comptroller, you can't have a CFO, you can't actually look under the hood of the federal government. From the executive side of things, which is absolutely insane. It's like saying a CEO can't look at the flow of money, in his business. And this is what people elected. Elon Musk is not some random guy. He's actually a staffer for the government. This is not being done in a haphazard way. And so you have the courts trying to interfere in executive power. And what you need to remember constitutionally is that unlike Congress, which is given a limited list of things that it can do, the executive is vested with all executive power, which is to run the government. And they are democratically elected. So for the courts to come in and say, no, you can't do this. You can't actually exercise authority or look at what is going on underneath you as the chief executive officer of the government, according to the Constitution, is absolutely unconscionable. And what this is leading to answer your question, Jill, is consistent clashes between these activist federal judges and an executive branch that says, this is ridiculous, no. And ultimately, if they keep up with this, what is going to happen is something like the old Andrew Jackson adage, how are you going to enforce this? We say no because the president is also takes an oath to the Constitution and has to interpret the Constitution. The courts aren't the sole arbiters of that, and they're going to undermine the efficacy and authority of the courts.
I look at the FEMA story, and that's one of the things that we have been talking about for so long here on this show is the people of Western North Carolina, the people in Los Angeles. Over the weekend, we get the news that came out, right, that it's $59 million to house illegals in New York City.
Yep.
And they were saying, oh, that's not happening. That doesn't happen. Well, now we know that it in fact has, because DOGE, Elon and the boys have come in and said, hey, here are the payments. We see this now. At what point, right, Elon, DOGE, the teams, they keep working their way through the system. Pete Hegseth has already said, come on in. The Department of Defense welcomes you, right? Trump said over the weekend, the Department of Education will be next on the list. How much more of this are we going to be seeing?
We're going to be seeing a lot more of it. And here's what I think is coming. The left needs to understand, and a lot of people who are confused in this country need to understand, that all the people who are in the streets now, this lefty thing of we're in the streets because you took our money away. There are a lot of good people in this country who have refused to go to the streets for a long time because they've been patient, because they're good citizens. But after a certain point, right, there's going to be a reversal, because when you spend $59 million on illegal immigrants to put them up in hotels and you ignore American citizens in an entire swath of this nation and just let them there to rot and freeze, eventually, like, good people are going to start going, you know what? I'm done with this. I don't want to pay my taxes. I want a year jubilee. I'm sick of it. And that's happening day by day. And the people who are upset now, who think we're still in the old order, in the old era, you're in for a rude awakening, because you can go in the streets and argue for your gimmies and it's fascism because people aren't magically paying you money. But the good people in America are going to wake up daily because they're going to see more and more examples of just how their money is being mismanaged and spent, and it's not for their own good.
Well, the good people of America want to wake up and make sure that they see Trump's cabinet appointed as he wants it to be. But when we come back, we'll unpack the recent hit pieces against Kash Patel next. Well, did you know 85% of all the grass-fed beef that's in stores is actually imported? That's thanks to a 2015 law change. All this foreign meat can be labeled product of the United States just because it's packaged here. That means that grocery store meat, they can have a lot of the antibiotics, the hormones, and the seed oils that nobody wants in their food. But Good Ranchers is different. They're 100% American meat. They don't have any of the additives, none of the seed oils. It's just clean, high-quality protein. Their beef, chicken, and seafood are born, raised, and harvested right here in the United States, so you know exactly where your food comes from. And their seed oil-free chicken nuggets are officially back. So they're made with whole cuts of chicken. They're gluten-free, allergy-safe, and packed with clean, delicious flavor that you can feel good about serving. And you can subscribe to any of their box of nuggets or get them as an add-on to any order. And the best part, Good Ranchers delivers straight to your door, so you can skip all the grocery stores and get that farm-to-table quality while supporting American farms and ranches. Right now, they have their New Year, New Meat promo. You get free ground beef, chicken breast, or wild-caught salmon in every order for a year, plus $25 off with code Jill at checkout. Don't wait, go order now. Good Ranchers, American meat delivered. Last week, we told you how the Senate voted to delay Kash Patel's confirmation hearing and that the Democrats are going to use that time to dig up dirt on Patel. Well, now we get a report from the Washington Post that claims that Patel was paid $25,000 by a Russian filmmaker with ties to the Kremlin. Patel is also under fire for his business ties to Shein. It's a Chinese fashion realtor, and they're accused of using slave labor. Now, here to break all this down for us is J. Michael Waller. He's a senior analyst for the strategy at the Center for Security Policy. So, J. Michael, thanks so much for joining us again. We all knew that they were going to try and go after Kash Patel. So now, what's your take on all of these accusations that we just so suddenly have found?
Yeah, it's a question of all these crack journalists at the Washington Post finding easily available information that was already disclosed to the Senate Judiciary Committee and to the Justice Department Ethics, and making a big scandal that it's too late for people to really follow up on. The vote on Kash is the first one in the Senate, I think, takes place Thursday. So this is just your typical, what you'd expect of an October surprise before an election.
Yeah, what strikes me about this is, what's hilarious about this is that there's so much Chinese money flowing into Washington, D.C., and every politician and every politico known to man, that it's not even considered corruption, right, normally. I mean, tons of Chinese money. It's okay if the Russians give $80 million to the Clintons, right? That's fine. But we're going to talk about a $25,000 thing for a TV series. Do you think this stuff has legs, though? I mean, this is their plan. They were going to gunk up the works and throw a bunch of this stuff into the mix, and they'll continue to do so right up until the vote. Do you think it's sticking or no?
Not yet. You never know, because it's going to be a close vote given certain members of Congress. But the fact is, this information was already raised before the Judiciary Committee. Any concerns were either, handled, in person with the senators or during Kash's hearings. So a $25,000 payment to participate in a film program is really not a big deal, especially this individual involved. He's being labeled as a Russian. Well, he's a Ukrainian citizen who's a dual national of Russia who became a naturalized American. So he's an American of Russian and Ukrainian background and citizenship. So you really don't know, this is not really revealed in the headlines that we're reading.
Yeah, that sounds awful discriminatory and closed-minded, not to call him an American in some fashion. I want to switch gears real quick, because something that's really important that you've been discussing on X and elsewhere is USAID. I mean, so here's a program that's been around for a while, and I really wanted you to share with our audience your expertise on this, because you were involved in the 90s, right, and seeing the problems with this organization. And I think it's important that people understand that history and how it metastasized into what it is today, given that there's so much misinformation about it now as the left tries to strike back.
Well, USAID was created by President Kennedy in an executive order that made it a tool of American foreign policy to combat Russian or Soviet communist subversion worldwide. And it was always supposed to have been that way. And then the Cold War dissolves, and USAID is trying to find a new reason of existence. What happened was it became, when it lost its sense of mission and lost its focus, it started looking for new functions. And in looking for new functions, it brought on more and more and more contractors, and it became an entity of its own. When I first subcontracted with USAID in the late 80s, very early 90s, I was working to train the former Contras in Nicaragua in political organization and political communication so they could set up their own opposition party against the communist Sandinista regime. They were doing it as an instrument of U.S. foreign policy, but they were so strict with their rules on neutrality, they forbade me to say that the communists were bad. Now, it was all understood, but that was one of the rules. I cannot criticize any political party in the country where this program is going on. So they were that narrow in being apolitical, which I think was sort of went over the top, but it was still useful. That went out the window. So when I was a subcontractor for a little while in Russia, right after the Soviet collapse, I was trying to set up a Frank Church-style committee that the Senate had right in the mid-1970s to investigate the CIA, and a counterpart committee in the House to investigate the FBI really thoroughly. And this was a committee that I helped set up in the Russian State Duma, which was then very pro-American, to have oversight of the former KGB and rip it out by the roots and expose everything and tear up the networks and everything else. USAID refused to support that policy, even though a lot of Russian lawmakers of various political parties wanted to do it, as well as anti-communist dissidents and Russian journalists who were on our side and so forth. It later turned out, the former dissidents told me they recognized the USAID person, a Russian lawyer, who they remembered being a judge in the KGB secret tribunals who sent them off to the Gulag.
These stories are just incredible. But I want to go back to having known USAID since 1980s, right? What have you made of the last 2 weeks of all of the headlines, of everything coming out, the way that it is starting to be peeled back one layer of the onion at a time?
Yeah. I never wanted anything to do with them after the mid 90s when I saw they were becoming a club of friends and cronies in the Washington Beltway area and all their friends around the country and around the world. And then you had people in USAID making a top government salaries, leaving to become top contractors with USAID and getting paid a ton more money. So it became this sense of careerism where you work your way to the top in order to become a contractor. And you leave now your, say, $150,000 a year job to become a contractor for $250,000 a year. And then if you start up your own contracting company with USAID, you're allowed to make a 10% profit on top of the gross value of the contract. And the federal law allows CEOs of government contractors to make up to $660,000 a year salary. So if you're paying yourself as a CEO, you get your CEO salary plus all of that profit margin, so you can become a millionaire in very short time.
Well, let's talk about something very important that we've spoken about before, but is now actually rolling forth, and that's President Trump announcing that he's going to be rooting out all these woke ideologies from the military academies. What do you think? What does this mean? You know, when people say, "Oh, he's going to uproot," as our headline says here, woke leftist ideologues from the military. What specifically are we talking about? What needs to be done at these institutions?
A lot. Remember the military academies, and then the command and general staff colleges that train our officers to become commanders and members of the work on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and other military schools. These are properties of the American taxpayer. So they're not like a university where there's free inquiry for academia and professors can say what they want. What has happened over time, it's really since the Obama administration, was these, even a bit before then actually, was that these academies became more and more left-wing, where there was no sense of balance anymore, no pretense of balance anymore, to the point where, starting under Obama, they were actively pushing DEI and critical theory in their curriculum.
Well, we saw in December that they had their best December in 15 years. Of course, we know that they're trying to make up for a 41,000 recruitment deficit from the previous year. So how far do you think that they can go in making a big change just in this calendar year alone?
Oh, I think quite a bit. I know a lot of kids. I mean, my son dropped out of the Army because he thought it was a do-nothing Army, and his unit was, in his words, only as good as the fattest girl in the unit. So when you have an Army that's lowered its standard that way, your warrior class of people won't want to sign up. So look at the brand new recruitment ads that are coming out. They're really great. They're really, highly motivating. They're really energizing. So I think that with the changes underway, we'll see a big boost in military recruitment and a big boost in the quality of the recruits.
Yeah, well, we had the good Dr. Wadinsky on here who worked in the DOD for a while, talking about going to West Point, for instance, to try to straighten it out and realizing, there's a lot more to do. I don't know how many Americans, myself included, would love for West Point to become a place where I want to send my son. But as you say, and as someone who's been in the academy, to really root that out, which is possible, I think, in the military academies, if you really had the will, because they do have control, you have to do a lot, and you have to get rid of a lot of personnel. Personnel is policy. Thanks for coming on today. It's good.
Good to be with you.
J. Michael Waller, thanks so much as always. We'll see you next time.
See you then.
MP, when we look at this, again, it's military readiness, it's the actual recruitment of the kids. There are so many different facets of this military preparedness that they still need to go and tackle. Yeah, look, Hegseth and others have said it's going to take a long time to get these institutions in shape. I believe he said, like the Air Force, for instance, they're so messed up, it's going to take 7-8 years. I mean, people who are serious about reform understand the institutions themselves have a long way to go.
but they're committed to doing that. But the first step is exactly to get people to want to come back because they realize that the leadership, I mean, look, people want to serve their country. So many good people, good-hearted Americans want to serve, and that's been taken away from them because they see this terrible leadership. Now they see a glimmer of hope, and you see people signing up. But the reality is, as Waller reminds us, this is a long haul, and it's going to take getting rid of a lot of people to actually reform them. You're talking about places that are woke in ways you don't even want to imagine, but we have to go in and do the work.
Well, don't go anywhere because it's Chris Bedford time when we come back. He'll explain how the Democrat resistance to Trump is even more chaotic than you thought. Just ahead. If you've been paying attention to the Democrats, you may be wondering what exactly is their strategy to combat Trump's agenda. Then you look at Representative Maxine Waters heckling federal workers outside of the Department of Education building to the outrage over USAID. There's no clear and cohesive opposition to MAGA. Blaze senior politics editor Chris Bedford wrote about this in his latest Beltway brief, and he joins us now. So Bedford, let's have you try to explain the Democratic strategy or lack thereof right now.
So it's definitely a lack thereof. There is no strategy. There's infighting. There's a lot of argument among senior figures and past figures on what the future could potentially hold. I mean, you've got Maxine Waters out there screaming in front of the Department of Education, 86 years old, wagging her finger in people's faces. And this is the sort of thing that may have seemed more normal, I guess, or been more accepted in the first Trump administration when his presidency was regarded as a fluke. And the Democrats essentially treated him as an illegitimate leader, someone who was just an aberration. And don't worry, Joe Biden or someone else is going to come and we're going to put these things right. But his credibility has built an incredible amount globally. He's one of the more credible political figures on the planet right now, and is someone who is kind of defining the political moment and the times. So this street theater just doesn't work anymore. But then you look at what they're doing in D.C. and in the actual Senate. You've got these octogenarians and septuagenarians staying up all night to protest OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, the confirmation of Russ Vought, who served as director of OMB during the first administration for 4 years. Now, granted, this is a really important role. It's one that we've talked about a lot. It's crucial rooting out the deep state. I get why they're freaked out about it. But at the end of the day, the American people don't know what OMB is, and they're not going to make Russ Vought a thing. He's not going to be some kind of villain character that you can really work with. It reminds me of the frustration Republicans have trying to make George Soros a thing. It's just not ever going to happen. Stick to things that are people who are well known, like Nancy Pelosi. And then you've got this really kind of wild fight over USAID. Now, I get it. This is a part of their worldview. It's been a crucial part of the machine. We've been talking about that in the mandate. It's wild to see it being dismantled in real time. But the American people don't favor foreign aid. The American people voted for this. And there's very few voices who are out there actually saying that. You've got Bill Maher out there saying, actually, this is exactly what people voted for. And the president's approval rating is zooming. I mean, actually, with Zoomers, it's up 10 points. That's incredible. It turns out that they're a more conservative generation than the baby boomers in recent polling. So when but everyone unites and says, we got to cut money. One of the places is foreign aid. So when you have Democrats banging themselves against the wall and telling Rahm Emanuel, who was chief of staff to Barack Obama, a two-term successful Democratic president, when you've got David Axelrod, who was advisor to Barack Obama for 2 terms, a very successful president, and you have these clowns who just can't really get it together, and they're dismissing this advice, it shows you just how lost they are.
It really is an amazing time to be alive. We have to say, I mean, when you look out there, at least when I look around and try to steelman these arguments and say, well, what do they have? What you see is there's 2 big blocks. One is the low information, mentally ill sort of Redditor, who's out there very perturbed about what's going on because they're just so much in the bubble of weird lefty media. And then there's the professional managerial class, which, is losing their McMansion or whatever and literally no one gives a shit. Like, there's no one who cares. And there's nothing that they can do to really rally the troops. And like exactly as you say in this column, you got octogenarians out there trying to rally the protest. It's insane. It's a beautiful, beautiful time to be alive. We can't talk about it enough, but we do have some obstacles that we do need to talk about. Our own Rebecca Zelko today writes this article about the House Freedom Caucus, and they're putting out their own bill, basically suggesting we need two beautiful bills and not one big beautiful bill to get moving on the president's agenda. This is my understanding of it anyway, that as she writes, they see, look, we have priorities with the border, et cetera. We need to get this smaller bill out there now to get the ball rolling, rather than what Mike Johnson seems to want, which is the one big, beautiful bill. Is that correct? And why? My instinct on this, without knowing all the details, has been, why not just pass a smaller bill now? Why are we waiting for this one big package? What can you tell us about this?
Well, there's been such confusion on Capitol Hill these past few weeks. No one seems to know who's in charge. There's been an unbelievable level of finger pointing. People looking at Mike Johnson supposedly in charge, but his team is certainly in over their heads. And people are looking at him and saying, all right, where's the budget? And then they're looking at Ways and Means and saying, Congressman, where's the budget? And then they're looking all over, and everyone seems to think it's someone else's job. So despite having a 3-day retreat in Miami to work this out, despite having such a long meeting at the White House last week that Benjamin Netanyahu, who was supposed to meet with the president afterwards, left his meeting with the most powerful person on the planet, they still hadn't been able to hammer it out. So this is kind of an opening fire. And what's interesting about what you hear repeatedly from the Freedom Caucus, but you don't hear from leadership, is why are people so afraid of the legislative process? Their worry here is that you sit there for weeks and weeks and weeks, nothing happens, you're supposedly making plans behind closed doors, and what usually happens with the Republican and the Democrat, the modern DC form of governance, is they all just come out with this last-minute omnibus. It's absolutely giant, or some reconciliation thing that's absolutely giant, and they say we have to pass this or everything shuts down. And there was no legislative process. The congressmen and senators, more so congressmen, have been reduced to yes and no votes at the very end, in line with party allegiance, as opposed to saying yes along the way, having discussion on the floor, having debate back and forth. Now, leadership's point on this is that they don't want to expose infighting. A two-person Republican majority is so unbelievably small that Chip Roy, whoever else wants to, can pull the plug and blow the whole thing up. So for the last couple of weeks, you've seen the Freedom Caucus going to leadership saying, well, how much do we need to cut? And leadership says, well, what do you need to get? What do we need to cut in this budget for you to be a yes vote? Freedom Caucus turns back and says, well, that depends on how much you're spending, right? I mean, we can't balance a budget unless I know what's going out as well as what's coming in. All of these things have to be broken down. This is just an opening fire, and what I suspect is going to be negotiations. I mean, these last couple of weeks have surprised me, but I still don't think Washington is ready to just pass unadulterated the Freedom Caucus's opening shot in D.C. for what they would like to see the budget. But this will hopefully force Republicans in Capitol Hill to just get moving.
Yeah, and there's a certain number of Republicans that are always just a no vote on the CR, no matter what's happening.
And they can't do that anymore.
I know. That's why this time around is actually going to be more interesting than what we saw in December. And if you're like me and you love a deadline, March 14th, kids, is the date that we should have circled on our calendar. Because my question to you is, do you think that anything will get done before that March 14th deadline, where they have to pass, by that point, another CR bill?
I think it's not looking good right now, honestly. It should be imminently doable if Republicans get their act together and start actually putting forward proposals. Because now, here's the good thing about the Freedom Caucus putting this out. It's going to create jealousy. All those people who are saying, it's not my job, is now going to say, why are they doing that? That's my job. And they're going to come forward and put forward their proposals. And these things, it's been so hard to build anything because you haven't even known what the materials were. They couldn't list their spending cuts because they didn't know how much was going to get spent, and vice versa. They didn't know what they're going to do with taxes. They didn't know what they're going to do first. It's kind of like when you've got a project at home And it's just so big. It's overwhelming. You don't know what to do. You end up drinking beers down in the basement instead. You have to get started. You have to put that cornerstone down. And this is a step in that right direction. I mean, DC is like an Adderall hyped college kid. They like to get it all done the night before. They like to pull an all-nighter. They like to absolutely cram. And maybe they definitely don't do their best work. They're certainly not learning any lessons. But unfortunately, that's the way the city operates.
Well, let's talk about Hunter Biden. I want to let the past die, but we need to change topics and talk about Hunter, everyone's favorite prodigal son. As you know, Chris Lindy Lee, a former Democratic strategist and fundraiser, revealed that Hunter Biden, quote, commandeered the country after Joe Biden's debate performance last year. Of course, Lee's credibility here is questionable. She's accused Donald Trump of terrorizing the Capitol and colluding with Russia. And this is an article that many people are saying, many people clicked on Joe's article, and they were curious about this. What do you think about listening to what she has to say?
I tell you what, it was a little overwhelming to see the zombie pass blast into my signal messages at 6:30 this morning after Super Bowl Sunday to wake up to as many work slacks and as many signals as I did about the crackhead president with the baby crying. It was a great morning. But the whole thing came together, and I started looking at it first. At first, I kind of wrote it off a little bit like you did. Like, oh, she's a fundraiser. I mean, what do they know? Although, of course, they are privy to gossip, and she was a very high-level bundler of money for the Democratic Party. But then I started to remember, and my wife covered Hunter Biden for a very long time for the Washington Examiner, that aides were always annoyed at the access that he had. Aides were always chafing, and you'd occasionally see the leaks that Joe Biden takes his advice way too carefully, way too seriously. And then I looked back and saw the June article from NBC right after the debate. And it was kind of funny. The way that NBC poised it is Hunter Biden keeps his father close after a disastrous debate performance. Like, look at this loyal son in his father's eyes. They didn't actually decide to craft this as crackhead is the new president running the country. But they did include things like he was sitting in on meetings. He was now a part of this decision process. The kind of thing that you would normally do if your father was running a business and he was on his last few months and he was suffering dementia. But this was different because Hunter Biden is a felon, a crackhead, and an international schemer of all kinds. So not the kind of person you'd want to give a clearance to, but now he's in these meetings making these decisions. And I realized that it's just another one of those wild stories. It actually does vibe. It fits with contemporaneous reporting. And remember, if you're in a courtroom and you can say all you want, well, this guy did this 6 months ago. But if you have a contemporaneous account 6 months ago, you wrote an email to someone saying this guy's doing something, it carries a lot more weight than just remembering back and saying this is the way it was. So that kind of combination of factors doesn't make me think that Hunter Biden was running the country, but he definitely had way more impact than what the American people expected. And it's extremely rich. All these Democrats to be complaining that there's an unelected Elon Musk involved in government. But none of these federal workers are elected. Hunter Biden was not elected. Barack Obama had left office, and the staff who ran Hunter Biden, none of them had election certificates. So it's just rich to hear this line coming from them with all these stories breaking.
Listen, we were promised shock and awe from the Trump White House. We have gotten that, right? All of these Trump executive orders have come out. But the one thing, Bedford, he can't go back and just tell us everything that happened in the Biden White House. So how long are we going to have to wait for like a tell-all book, right? I want to know all of the crazy stories and the real ones that happened in the Biden White House. So how long am I going to have to wait for that?
Oh, I bet you they're working on it right now. Actually, that's a good idea.
Please.
I should reach out to my old publisher and figure that out, because you know that once one person launches a salvo that blasts Jill Biden or whatever, she's going to release a book that blasts back. And that's once you get all the fighting and the infighting back and you start to see the back and forth and you see people making money, and that's when you can read them all, parse through the details, and actually figure out where the truth might be somewhere in the middle of all the cat fighting.
Look, I just want to know whose cocaine it was. Was it Kamala's or Hunter's? I mean, I'm open-minded. I just want to know whose coke it was. Very simple.
Poor Hunter Biden. Imagine losing a pack of narcotics at the workplace where it's the White House. You're searching your pocket, like, where to go? Where to go? Where to go? Did I finish it? And then the Secret Service calls. Oh, man. You're too old to be getting in that kind of trouble, Hunter.
All right, Bedford, I just want that for Christmas, that book. Wherever you need to talk to, whoever you need to talk to there in D.C., make that happen. Christmas Day, Christmas morning, this is what I want to be unwrapping. Yeah, well, perfect. That's even better. I can use this over a Christmas break then. Thanks so much.
I'll get back to you.
All right, we'll talk to you later, Bedford.
See you tomorrow.
When you look at it, all this stuff that's going on with the craziness in D.C., right? We talk about the Democrats at the very beginning of that segment, how they have no idea what they're doing. But then you look at the Republicans and you're like, well, I hope that they know what they're doing at this point. But now you have the House Freedom Caucus taking the lead after Lindsey Graham in the Senate had already said, you know what, I'm going to lead on reconciliation. And at this point in time, it's like Republicans get together, form a plan, and move forward with whatever the plan is, because it's never been easier to look better than the Democrats than right now. And yet they're kind of stumbling over a stack of papers that's less than an inch high.
Let me give you a very simple rule from Professor Peterson about politicians, elected politicians, especially legislators. The vast majority of them need to be told what to do. Someone has to tell them what to do. You may not want to believe that. You may rebel against me and say you want statesmen. But let me just tell you, from the time that I've been walking the earth, most legislators need to be told, most politicians need to be told what to do. And in this case, they're begging for a leader. So God bless the House Freedom Caucus for coming up. But they have to be corralled and told what to do by someone that makes it happen. So if they step up, House Freedom Caucus, to do 2 bills instead of 1, great. But they won't do it themselves as congressional critters the way that they are, at least in our day and age. And that's just the bottom line. And so do they have a plan? No. Someone is going to have to tell them what to do and give them a plan. And if that's the House Freedom Caucus, great. I don't care who it is. But you need to internalize the principle. You have to tell these people what to do.
I'm going to give myself some homework tonight, and I'm going to figure out who they are, the Republicans that never vote for a CR, and just figure this out, because it's going to be very fun, I think, this time to play along at home and just try and see how this is all going to shape up here in the next coming weeks and into the next month here for the Republicans on their side. So don't go anywhere. Should Canada become part of the United States? We'll have your answers right after this.
I've been speaking to a lot of Canadians about how they feel about what Donald Trump's doing. Of course, there's worry, but now Canadians are pissed off. They feel insulted. You know, we were good neighbors. We worked together to build a good economy, and Donald Trump has insulted us. People feel offended at this idea of the 51st state.
Maybe you should be offended. That's fine. We're in the United States right now. We're fine with that. But I took to X earlier today and asked you what your opinion is. Do you think that Canada should become the 51st state? This has been floating around there for a while, MP. And I want to say we have found our audience here. 73% of people say no, I do not want Canada to become the 51st state. And I'm with you.
It's very interesting. I mean, our audience is, of course, second to none, and they have reasons for this. Initially, you might think, great, expand. But I think that there's some very smart people in the audience thinking about the problems that might arise if it was the 51st state.
Well, one is our coworker here at Blaze Media, Rob Eno, replied, and he said, I said no, but we want Alberta, Saskatchewan, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, and we also want Quebec to become a Bourbon monarchy to start the reconquest of France from. He thought a lot about that. I'll give Rob Eno credit for this. He has thought long and hard about this question when it came up.
Might have thought a little bit too much about that question, if you ask me, Rob. But I see where he's going with this. Look, you want the red states of Canada, as it were, and some of the beautiful areas, and the Quebecois, okay, but just a little bit of note of caution on here. Full disclosure, I believe Rob's relatives may be from Quebec. So
that might have
be a little
something
biased
to do this. I think it's the Bell Center, I want to say, is in Montreal. They have really good hot dogs that they sell there. So I would be on board with that. If we're going to take them over, at least we need to get some of the good food deals that they have. And they are legendary, by the way. Hammer wrote and replied, why should we? Wouldn't that be like adding another California or New York? Great point.
Yeah, don't you think this is the reason I think most people say no? Because if you really did make all of Canada one state, that would be exactly another big California or New York. And we know how they voted in the past. We know how they vote as a whole. And it's not great, not good, Bob, you know? So I can see the rationale.
The Eggman said, I said yes, but I think that it should become a territory. We would both be able to hold our own elections and would benefit greatly from the oil and mineral trading.
Hey, you could make it a territory and then you gerrymander it. You know, you just cut it up to make sure it votes the right way. That certainly is a possibility. Making it a territory, fine. But my argument is, isn't it kind of already a territory in a way anyway, if we just establish the right trading relationship?
Right. I look at Canada right now. They're rolling over with the tariffs. They're doing what we needed them to do. So are we even going to need to have any further arguments with our neighbors up north?
Yeah, to be fair, the people of Canada have been through a lot and are pushing back now, and they need to be supported in that effort to push back against Trudeau and the insane sort of fascism that they've had going on for a long time. And I think there's something very healthy developing in there, and Trump and others in this country should continue that trend and push them in the right way. And then in terms of trade, yeah, I mean, a little bit of roughhousing might lead to very good solutions for all sides.
So many of the people in our audience have picked a lane, whether they want Canada as the 51st state or not. Now, you are going to pick a lane in a different way.
Yeah, I want to talk about picking a lane or choosing a theme today because it's one of these things that keeps coming up in modern society, whether you're talking about media, politics, or anything else. You know, a long time ago, there was a guy, Thomas Aquinas, made a great point about learning little streams. You proceed from the little streams to the river and out into the ocean. And a lot of people today, you know, want it all, and that's understandable, but they don't actually know anything about anything particular. A lot of people want to be Joe Rogan, for instance. I'm going to start a podcast, but they don't want to actually start by particular themes, knowing particular stuff, becoming a particular, cut of influencer. They just want to go out there and interview everyone, right? I mean, that's the sort of cartoon that I'm talking about. You see it in politics all the time. Someone comes up and they become influential, whether it's the right or the left, and they start talking and they become a big talker and everyone flocks to them. But what you always have to ask yourself in your own life and when you look out onto the scene is who actually knows stuff about stuff? You know, take the media. So many journalists today literally know nothing about anything. I mean, what they do is they get on, they pontificate, they say the right things. You know, that there used to be something in journalism that was very interesting, especially at the local level, where you had an old editor who actually knew everything going on in his town. You might agree with him, you might disagree with him, but they knew stuff about stuff. They knew everyone in the town. They picked up the phone and called people. They knew stuff about an area. If they were a tech reporter, they actually knew something about tech. They knew people in it. They were knowledgeable, right? And that is the key to success. And I bring this up because we're in the middle of the beginning of this golden age where there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot sitting there on the plate for you to take both in your personal life, and there's a lot for you to analyze and reanalyze in terms of everyone's reanalyzing, you know, what you trust in the media, who you trust on the right as well as the left. And the important thing is to look for people who actually have picked a lane and they know stuff about stuff. You're not going to lose anything in your own life if you pick an area to become knowledgeable about, if you pick a theme to stick to the end, to learn about, or a skill that you're actually able to accomplish over time in one area. You don't lose anything by that. You only gain. The rest of your life is only going to be improved by sticking to the point. And the problem that we all face is in our own lives, the feed is constantly taking our eyes and are distracting us this way and that. And we lose the lanes, the grooves through which we establish the right habits and the right ways of thinking and the right lines of knowledge and the right rabbit trails that lead us to actually knowing something about something. And both in our own lives and in the way when we look around and the people we listen to, this is an enormous problem today. Pick a lane and develop a skill, develop a line of knowledge, And don't worry, you're not going to lose out on anything. You don't have to have fear of missing out about anything. And when you look to who to follow, look for people who've done that over time, because those are people who can actually inform you and aren't just copying what other people say and blowing a lot of hot air.
It's the 10,000 hours theory, right? Where you go through and you pick one thing and
Yes.
you get really good at it. And there's so much to that, because right now where we are in this time, there's never been more information. It's so easy and information is so abundant. But to your point, who do you trust? How do you know what to decide? Even the thought process of how do I decide to click through this information or that information? But I do love that, because if you are a subject matter expert is always what I like to go back to. I love being subject matter experts and even just a couple different things, right? Because you're never going to go out there and be a subject matter expert in absolutely everything. You kind of have to pick 2, 3, 4 buckets and say, okay, these are the things that I'm going to use, and then I'm going to build upon those.
Yeah, it's like saying you can't travel everywhere in the world your whole life. Like, I mean, that maybe a few people do that for some weird reason. You can't do that. You got to pick a few, right?
Italy forever. Yeah. It's fine. I just go back to Italy. It's fine.
Yes, and it's an enormously important point in a time where everyone's disconnected and disengaged. And of course, you need to realize when you're listening to people out there or reading them, you can sound good, you can write good, right? You can look good, you can say the right things, and just be an actor, a talking head on the stage that's literally a puppet that knows nothing about anything. So wherever the information's coming from, it needs to be people who care, who are doing it for the right reasons, and who do know stuff about stuff. And that's what the digital age offers us, is the opportunity, right, to find those people and those shows and those books where there's actual knowledge.
Well, it takes 2 of the different lessons that you've done now, which is the 10,000 hours theory is what I'm going to call this one, and the community, building your community. You're able now to have more lasting relationships, more meaningful relationships than just some of the surface level stuff that we've seen out here. And that has honestly led to a lot of people being depressed in this day and age.
Oh yeah, because everything's spread so thin and they're disconnected, where you start inviting people over. We have to explain this these days. It's sad. Invite people over to dinner who, agree on some fundamental things. And maybe you read something together, God forbid, or you have a topic of conversation over time. You start developing those grooves and those relationships that are meaningful. And you got to just not be distracted by the feed. And that means you have to be intentional about picking your lane and what you do with your time.
Pick a lane. I like it. That's what we're going to end on here today. And also, the Chiefs lost the Super Bowl, so MP is happy. Everything is right in the world again.
Strangely therapeutic. I didn't think I cared, but strangely therapeutic to watch that team get torn apart by the Eagles.
You didn't know that you were going to pick a lane in the Super Bowl, but your brain had already done it for you. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back to break it all down with you tomorrow night.
What do you think? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it's fun.